Hi everyone, and welcome to the Generalist, where security practitioners look beyond niches, silos, egos, and hopefully build their competence and credibility. My name is Ilya Umanskiy. I want to talk briefly about three things that concern what I would say, not just myself, but the people that I'm interacting with, and should concern you as well. Number one, we'll never solve the school shooting problem by being men with hammers, or people with hammers, to be politically correct. We'll never solve it because after every event, after every incident, we continue to dive into these focused topics of guns, gun ownership, police training. But all of those conversations are happening in their own little echo chambers. Okay, there are activists that are on both sides of the aisle, of course, that are arguing for the right to own guns, and the activists who are saying there should be further restrictions. However prudent and measured and correct each argument is, that doesn't get us closer to solving the problem. And the same goes for pretty much every other echo chamber. It could be very prudent to say that, oh yeah, we need to train up police better. I agree with that. I think that the recent incident in Uvalde demonstrates how small town police departments just don't have the wherewithal to deal with incidents of this magnitude. Not only the incident itself, but how the system is set up to identify potentially dangerous actors, and how the system is set up then to deal with the ramifications of the incident. And so it seems like the same happens in our industry, where more chatter is visible in different circles and different platforms, where salespeople from various companies begin to push their products, saying, oh, if you had this particular system at the school, it probably would have prevented or made the effects of the incident, I guess, if you could say that, less pronounced, minimize the effects of the incident. But that alone, again, exists in vacuum, and there's unfortunately a lot of mediocrity across all of those conversations, because we're not understanding, or at least maybe we're not processing well, the complexity of the problem. And the complexity of the problem, it necessitates a conversation that incorporates all of these individual echo chambers, breaks down the barriers across those echo chambers, finds the right expertise that needs to be at the table from diversity of backgrounds, and then arrives at some solutions that cut across each one of the individual focus areas. Okay, think of it as design thinking, for lack of a better analogy. And so we are struggling, continuing to struggle, because of the media that's obviously pounding our brains, to look past these echo chambers and look beyond the perimeter of the school. And it seems like it's 2022. I've been talking about it, and a few of my peers have been talking about this issue for a number of years. And I even did a presentation on Columbine to a community here in Hong Kong. And unfortunately, the pace of our life and the ever-decreasing attention spans preclude us from taking a more concerted effort to solve this issue. So I feel like, given the current momentum, we're still not going to be closer to a solution. So I'm concerned that our industry is not thinking like an industry. I'm concerned that we are all either taking a part in the gun discussion, we're all taking a part in let's train the police discussion, we're all taking part in let's sell more bells and whistles to school discussion, but we're not having a meaningful conversation. And I find it to be strange. Now, it could also be argued that there are a lot of smart people in our industry. I think that's true. How is it possible that we're not hearing the voices from those people and the industry is not being guided by those voices to actually stop, use some critical thinking, understand the complexity of the problem, and then lobby for solutions that are actually meaningful? Okay? And one thing to think about is the solution for school security does not rest on schools' premises. It has nothing to do with school premises. Okay? It starts at the family's level, and then there's a connection to any educational institution that must be drawn, and there you can start developing some early warning signs. And it requires different skill sets. I've posted recently what appears to me to be a fairly cohesive approach. But again, short attention spans, the fact that I'm based in Hong Kong, the fact that there's lots of politics involved, of course, and unfortunately our susceptibility to media sensationalism. So that's issue one. The second one that I'm noticing is that there are several channels in the industry that provide consistent traffic of industry reports, tools that could potentially be useful to practitioners. And yet, I go back to the one issue that I identified earlier, is the lack of critical thinking, because a lot of these reports and tools are embraced and people are like, yeah, man, this is such a great resource, so useful, without really diving into the content and the context of these reports and tools to understand how those tools would apply to real life situations. So I often provide subtle commentary as an observer to demonstrate that to be honest with you, most of the reports skew the issues, and they unfortunately are more narrow than they are projected, than how they're projected, I should say. For example, the use of the word security, or security alone, without the word cyber, on reports that only talk about data protection of ones and zeros. That's a big misconception when you present a report that has the word security splattered on the front page without discussing that it actually pertains only to a subset of assets. That's a big claim to make. And unfortunately, very few people are paying attention to the fact that, no, this report doesn't really talk about security. It talks about a small subset of security, right? Or a small subset of assets in our purview, if you will. And unfortunately, people embrace these and just run with them and say, oh yeah, new industry report. Well, as some of the information in those reports could be accurate, unfortunately, when you take a look at what I said 5 years ago, about 5 years ago, maybe even longer than that, where I said that the word security will be usurped by cybersecurity industry, and it seems like I'm not too far off the mark. More and more, the word security is used by people who only operate, let's say, in the data protection space. Look at the RSA conference, look at the speakers there, the continually increasing the use of the word security without adding the word cyber to it. That's not accurate, nor does it speak for the expertise of those individuals. Those individuals don't actually know most of the spectrum where security is applied, if you will, because much like cyber, there is the other side, the other camp, which is called physical, right? And if you take those two camps and then break down the barrier of this misunderstanding that actually, no, you must have skills across the entire spectrum, you can plainly see that most of the people that talk about cybersecurity, they don't actually understand a significant component, this dark sea of knowledge that is required to protect assets. Much the same goes for the other camp, the physical security camp, right? A lot of folks who write reports, produce information, talk about the industry, talk about controls, who don't understand how to protect ones and zeros. And it seems to me like these conversations are also being kind of happening in parallel and in their own echo chambers. Even though there's a lot of talk, or used to be a lot of talk about the word convergence, I'm hearing less and less of it recently. And so maybe convergence applies to very large organizations, but that's like less than 1/10 of 1%. And so I feel like our industry continues to have these conversations in echo chambers. Much in parallel with these two issues that I just mentioned, the one that I notice also has to do with how young talent is being addressed and promoted in our industry. Recently, I noticed how a lot of young practitioners or aspiring practitioners are given platforms to offer opinions without scrutiny of their expertise, without scrutiny of their actual credibility. I'm hearing conversations where, let's say, a person who is in a sales role for a specific product or a series of technologies, even though they're related to the field of asset protection, security, right? That person is simply in a sales role. To understand whether that person actually understands protection of assets, in a generalist way across the two domains, at least physical and cyber, I don't think that scrutiny is in place. And so people offer opinions about protection of assets, again, in their own little echo chambers. And they talk about things like metaverse. They talk about things like even, unfortunately, threat management for, let's say, incidents like Uvalde, the school shootings, and various other armed assailant events, as though their niches where they sit are sufficient with the knowledge needed to address these complex problems. And I dare say that that's not true. Those practitioners who have their soapboxes, unfortunately, don't have the wide spectrum of expertise. I can say that because if I were to give them an actual physical environment, rich with both physical assets and also the digital assets, and then basically tell them, okay, here is your environment. Here is what you need to be mindful of protecting. Please design a set of solutions across the physical camp and across the digital camp to protect this environment. What would you do? And this is where I think their expertise can be tested and easily understood as being insufficient. I'm not saying there's not enough drive and eagerness on the part of these young and aspiring practitioners to actually know a lot. That's not the case. The effort is there. But I worry that, much like the other two examples I offered with the echo chambers that we're all subject to, I see that there's another echo chamber that is growing, and unfortunately is not helping our industry. And that echo chamber is where the young talent, without much experience or broad understanding of asset protection, how to deliver it, for example, right, for complex environments, this young talent is given soapboxes. And what they're able to talk about, unfortunately, again, under scrutiny, does not stand up to match the complexity of problems that we're all facing. So it seems like what we should be thinking about is actually breaking down the barriers across the echo chambers and bringing multidisciplinary conversations to the table with careful scrutiny of those who participate in those conversations. People who should be given soapboxes versus people who don't yet have enough expertise, don't yet have enough hands-on experience, and I dare say some academic experience to bolster their capabilities as observers, as researchers, as critical thinkers, to address complex problems in our industry and across industries that we're charged to protect. So those are the three things that stand out to me. I think that my objective here is to incentivize your critical thinking about every piece of information, every piece of content that you receive, including what I'm sharing with you, and really be far more scrupulous observers and conduct deeper analysis on the content and statements that you receive. Whether it be a conversation about gun control or a report that says securing the cloud, or a statement from a young and aspiring practitioner. We all can do a lot better to avoid the mediocrity that unfortunately continues to exist in our industry. We can do a lot better. We're not there yet, but it doesn't mean that we can't put the effort in. So I leave you with these thoughts. Thank you so much for your time, and please stay safe.